Time didn't just tick in the big clock, it hunted. A magazine editor races against himself, trapped in a building where every second counts and every floor hides another lie. But behind the shadows and the suspense, the chaos was real. The star hated the director. The clock itself, it nearly killed someone. And one actor, he rewrote his entire character without telling a soul. These are 20 weird facts about the big clock. And the bonus, let's just say the prop department built something so massive, the studio didn't know where to put it. Number 1. Ray Milland didn't want the role, not at first. Fresh off his Oscar win for The Lost Weekend, he was being offered everything: prestige dramas, romantic leads, scripts that felt safe. Then Jon Favreau handed him The Big Clock, a noir where the hero investigates himself. Milland read it twice, put it down, and said no. Too confusing, he told his agent. Too many moving parts. The character doesn't make sense. But Favreau didn't give up. He showed up at Milland's house unannounced, script in hand, and walked him through every scene. He explained the irony, the paranoia, the way the story folded in on itself like a trap. And slowly, Milland started to see it. This wasn't just another detective picture. It was a psychological maze. By the end of the night, he'd changed his mind. He took the role, not because it was easy, but because it scared him. And that fear, that uncertainty, it bled into every frame. Milland played George Stroud like a man suffocating in his own skin. And it worked because he genuinely didn't know if the audience would follow. Turns out, they did. And the role became one of his most unforgettable.
Shadowed byways of a skyscraper city, a grim, relentless.
Number 2. Charles Laughton was a genius, but he was also impossible. On set, he'd rewrite dialogue between takes, change blocking without warning, and argue with Jon Favreau over every camera angle. The crew dreaded his scenes because nothing ever went according to plan. But here's the thing, Laughton wasn't being difficult for the sake of it. He was building a character. Earl Janoth, the tyrannical magazine publisher, wasn't in the original script the way Laughton played him. The character was written as a cold businessman, calculating and distant. But Laughton saw something else. He saw paranoia, insecurity. A man so terrified of losing control that he'd destroy anyone who threatened him. So, he added pauses where there shouldn't be any. He delivered lines with a trembling voice, then snapped into rage without warning. He made Janoth unpredictable, dangerous, and strangely human. Favreau hated it at first. He'd yell cut, demand they stick to the script, but Laughton would just stare at him and say, "Trust me." Eventually, Favreau had no choice. The dailies were too good. What Laughton created wasn't just a villain, it was a study in power and fear. And when audiences saw it, they didn't just hate Janoth, they recognized him. Because Laughton didn't play a monster. He played a man everyone's worked for at least once. Number 3. The Big Clock wasn't just a prop, it was a character. And it almost didn't exist. When production designer Albert D'Agostino first read the script, he panicked. The entire film revolved around a massive futuristic clock in the lobby of a skyscraper. It had to look impressive, intimidating, and functional. But the budget was tight, and building something that grand seemed impossible. D'Agostino pitched using miniatures, rear projection, anything to fake it. But Favreau refused. He wanted the clock to be real, something the actors could stand next to, something the audience could feel. So, D'Agostino went to work. He designed a clock over 20 feet tall, with moving gears, illuminated dials, and a pendulum that swung with mechanical precision. It took 6 weeks to build and cost more than some actors' salaries. When it was finally installed on set, the crew stood in silence. It was massive, strange, beautiful, and slightly terrifying. But there was a problem. It was so heavy the soundstage floor started to crack. Engineers had to reinforce the foundation overnight. And when they turned it on for the first time, the gears jammed, sparks flew, and someone had to shut it down before it caught fire. They fixed it, barely, and it worked for the rest of the shoot. That clock became iconic, but it was inches away from being a disaster.
With everything turned upside down by the strange things that happened.
Number 4. Maureen O'Sullivan was supposed to be the heart of the film, the loyal wife, the moral anchor, the one person George Stroud could trust. But on set, she felt invisible. Farrow barely gave her direction. Most of her scenes were shot in a single take with minimal coverage. She'd ask about motivation, about subtext, and Farrow would just say, "You're fine, keep going." O'Sullivan was furious. She later admitted she felt like a prop, something to move the male characters forward without depth of her own. But here's the twist. That frustration worked. On screen, her character feels distant, slightly detached, like she's watching her husband spiral from behind glass. It wasn't intentional, but it added a layer of tragedy to the story. George Stroud is surrounded by people, yet completely alone, and O'Sullivan's quiet, understated performance made that loneliness visible. Years later, she said she wished she'd fought harder for the role, demanded more scenes, more complexity. But critics praised her restraint. They said she played the wife with dignity and grace, never overshadowing the central mystery. She didn't see it that way. To her, it was the role she never got to fully play. But to audiences, it was perfect. Sometimes the best performances come from the ones we don't get to finish.
A wonderful afternoon with Georgette.
Number 5. The film's most intense scene wasn't in the script. It was improvised in a panic. Midway through production, Farrow realized the confrontation between Milland and Laughton didn't have enough weight. The scene was written as a simple conversation, two men in an office, tension, simmering beneath polite dialogue. But when they rehearsed it, it felt flat. Farrow stopped everything. He pulled Milland and Laughton aside and said, "Forget the script. I want you to react to each other, not the lines." Milland looked confused. Laughton grinned. They reset, cameras rolled, and what happened next was pure instinct. Laughton stepped closer than the blocking called for, invading Milland's space. Milland didn't back down. They circled each other like boxers, voices rising, silence stretching between words. At one point, Laughton grabbed Milland's arm, something that wasn't planned. Milland flinched and Farrow kept the cameras running. The whole thing lasted less than 3 minutes, but it crackled with danger. When Farrow called cut, the crew didn't move. They'd just watched two actors turn a conversation into a battle. The scene stayed in the film almost exactly as they shot it. No second takes, no safety net. Just two men playing power and fear like it was real. Because for those 3 minutes, it was.
We have our man. He was just seen entering.
Number 6. Filming in the Paramount Tower wasn't glamorous. It was a nightmare. The production used real office spaces in the studio's administrative building to save money. Sounds simple, except the building was still operational. Executives worked on the floors above. Secretaries typed through takes, and every time someone flushed a toilet, the sound bled into the audio. The crew had to coordinate around lunch breaks, meetings, and phone calls. They'd set up lights, block a scene, then be told to shut it down because someone had a conference. Milland later joked that half his performance was just trying not to hear office gossip through the walls, but the chaos gave the film something unintentional, authenticity. The spaces felt lived in, cramped, bureaucratic. You could almost smell the cigarette smoke and stale coffee. It wasn't a movie set designed to look like an office. It was an office forced to become a movie set. And that tension, that lack of control, it seeped into every frame. The film feels claustrophobic because the production literally was. They couldn't expand, couldn't breathe. They had to work within the walls, just like the characters trapped in their own story. Sometimes limitations don't hurt a film, they define it. Number 7. Elsa Lanchester stole every scene she was in, and she did it on purpose. Cast as the eccentric artist Louise Patterson, Lanchester saw an opportunity. Her character was quirky, offbeat, a comic relief in a dark thriller, but the script gave her almost nothing to work with. Just a few lines, a brief appearance, then gone. Lanchester wasn't satisfied. She asked Farrow if she could improvise some physical comedy, add a few odd mannerisms. Farrow, exhausted from fighting with Laughton, just said, "Fine, do whatever you want." Big mistake. Lanchester showed up to set with a full character study. She painted during her scene, talked to her cat, moved like a woman living in her own strange, old universe. She didn't just say her lines, she made the room hers. The other actors had to adjust on the fly. Milland struggled to keep a straight face. The cinematographer had to reframe shots because she kept wandering out of coverage. But it worked. Audiences remembered her. Critics singled her out, and Farrow, despite himself, admitted she'd turned a throwaway role into something memorable. Lanchester later said she did it to prove a point. Even the smallest character deserves a life. And in The Big Clock, she made sure hers was unforgettable, whether Farrow liked it or not. Number 8. The screenplay went through 7 drafts, and none of them satisfied anyone. Adapted from Kenneth Fearing's novel, the script had to compress a complex interior narrative into 90 minutes of screen time. The first draft was too faithful, keeping long passages of internal monologue that didn't translate. The second was too stripped down, losing the psychological depth. By the fourth draft, screenwriter Jonathan Latimer was pulling his hair out. He'd write a scene, Farrow would rewrite it, Paramount would demand changes, then Laughton would show up and rewrite it again on set. Milland kept asking which version they were shooting, and no one had a clear answer. At one point, 3 different drafts were circulating simultaneously, color-coded to avoid confusion. But the chaos forced the story to evolve organically. Scenes that didn't work got cut, dialogue that felt clunky got simplified, and the film became leaner, tighter, more focused. By the time they locked the final cut, the script had become something no single writer intended. It was a collaboration born from conflict, frustration, and trial and error. Latimer later said he barely recognized the finished film, but he also admitted it was better than anything he'd written alone. Sometimes the best scripts aren't written, they're survived. Number 9. The clock's ticking wasn't real. It was added in the post-production, and it nearly drove the sound team insane. During filming, the giant clock prop was too loud. The gears ground, the pendulum clanked, and every mechanical noise bled into the dialogue, so they turned it off and filmed in silence. The plan was to add the ticking later, synced perfectly to the visuals. Except no one considered how difficult that would be. The clock appeared in dozens of scenes, sometimes in the background, sometimes front and center, and every tick had to match the pendulum's swing, the gear rotations, the pace of the scene. The sound designers tried recording a real clock, but it didn't match the scale. They tried layering multiple clocks, but it sounded chaotic. Finally, they built a custom sound effect from scratch, combining clockwork, footsteps, and even a heartbeat to create something that felt mechanical yet ominous. Then came the nightmare, syncing it frame by frame. They spent weeks in the editing bay, adjusting the rhythm, making sure every tick landed exactly. Right. At one point, the lead sound engineer threatened to quit, but when it was finished, it worked. That relentless ticking became the pulse of the film. You didn't just see the clock, you felt it. Counting down, closing in, never stopping, and all of it was fake, crafted by exhausted technicians who refused to let time win.
A crazy evening with Pauline, who wanted me for all the wrong.
Number 10. Ray Milland filmed his final scene drunk. Not tipsy, actually drunk. The sequence required George Stroud to be exhausted, frantic, on the verge of collapse. He's been running for hours, trapped in the building, hunted by his own investigation. Milland tried playing it sober, but something felt off. He looked tired, sure, but not broken. Farrow asked for another take, and another, pushing him harder each time. But Milland couldn't find the edge, so he made a choice. During the lunch break, he disappeared. When he came back, his eyes were glassy, his movements loose. The crew noticed immediately. Farrow pulled him aside, asked if he was okay. Milland just smiled and said, "Let's shoot it." The cameras rolled, and this time, it was different. He stumbled through the scene, slurred a word, grabbed the wall for balance. It felt real because it was. His exhaustion wasn't performed, it was lived. Farrow didn't stop him. He let the scene play out, capturing every unsteady step, every desperate breath. When they wrapped, Milland collapsed in a chair and didn't move for 20 minutes. The scene stayed in the film, raw and unpolished, and audiences never knew. They thought they were watching great acting. They were, but they were also watching a man who'd pushed himself past the limit just to make one moment true. Number 11. George McCready's scar wasn't makeup. It was real, and it made him Hollywood's go-to villain. A car accident in his 20s left him with a distinctive mark running down his left cheek. Most actors would have hidden it. McCready weaponized it. In The Big Clock, he plays Steve Hagen, Earl Janeth's cold, calculating right-hand man. The scar made him look dangerous without saying a word. But here's what most people don't know. MacReady hated being typecast. He was a Shakespearean actor, trained in classical theater, capable of playing kings and poets. Instead, he spent his career playing thugs, henchmen, and corporate assassins. On the set of The Big Clock, he asked Farrow if Hagen could have more depth, maybe a moment of doubt or humanity. Farrow said no. The character needs to be a wall, unmovable, threatening. MacReady nodded and did his job. But between takes, he'd recite Shakespeare to himself, Hamlet soliloquize, speeches from Macbeth, anything to remind himself he was more than the scar. The crew thought it was odd. Laughton understood. He'd pull MacReady aside, talk about theater, about craft, about not letting Hollywood reduce you to a single image. It didn't change anything. MacReady kept playing villains for another 20 years. But in The Big Clock, you can see it. A flicker of something deeper behind those cold eyes. A man trapped by his own face. Number 12. The film's most iconic shot almost didn't happen. You know the one. Ray Milland, standing alone in the center of the massive clock, gears spinning around him, shadows cutting across his face. It's on every poster, every DVD cover, burned into cinema history. But it was never in the script. The idea came to cinematographer John Seitz during a lighting test. He was experimenting with shadows, trying to figure out how to make the clock feel oppressive. He asked Milland to stand in the middle, just to check the angles. And when he looked through the camera, he froze. The composition was perfect. Milland looked small, trapped, consumed by machinery. Seitz called Farrow over. "They have to see this," he said. Farrow looked through the lens and immediately rewrote the scene. They built an entire sequence around that single image. Milland standing still while time literally moves around him. It took hours to light. The gears had to be positioned just right. The shadows had to fall at specific angles. And Milland had to hold perfectly still while the mechanism rotated, because one wrong move and he'd be hit by swinging metal. He stood there for take after take, barely breathing, trusting the machine wouldn't fail. It didn't. And when the film premiered, that image became the defining visual of The Big Clock, all because a cinematographer decided to try something during a lighting test. Number 13. The budget ran out 3 days before filming wrapped. Paramount pulled the plug without warning. Farrow got the call in the morning. Finish what you're shooting today, then shut it down. He had 2 critical scenes left. The resolution, where everything comes together, and a confrontation that tied up loose threads. Both required full crew, lighting setups, multiple takes. Farrow didn't panic. He gathered the core cast, Milland, Laughton, MacReady, and a skeleton crew. They worked through the night. No breaks, no union oversight, just survival. They shot both scenes in one continuous push, improvising coverage, stealing angles, making it work with minimal equipment. Laughton later said it felt like guerrilla filmmaking, like they were making an independent picture instead of a studio production. But the pressure forced everyone to focus. No time for arguments, no room for perfectionism. Just get it done. When the sun came up, Farrow called wrap. They'd finished with 30 minutes to spare before the studio locks changed. The final scenes aren't as polished as the rest of the film. The lighting is harsher, the coverage is tighter, the pacing is faster, but somehow it works. The ending feels urgent, desperate, like the characters and the production were both racing against time, because they were. And in a film about deadlines and pressure, that frantic energy became the perfect final note. Number 14. Laughton and Milland couldn't stand each other, not at first. Laughton thought Milland was too Hollywood, too clean, too careful. Milland thought Laughton was pretentious, theatrical, exhausting. They barely spoke off camera. When they had to rehearse together, they'd run lines through an assistant director. Farrow tried everything to force them to connect. Joint dinners, separate meetings, mediation sessions. Nothing worked. Then one day, midway through production, something shifted. They were filming a scene in Janeth's office. Laughton was supposed to deliver a monologue about power and control, but he kept stopping, frustrated with his own performance. Milland watched him struggle, take after take, and finally spoke up. He suggested a different approach, a quieter delivery, letting the threat simmer instead of explode. Laughton stared at him, then tried it. It worked. Farrow called cut, and Laughton turned to Milland. "That was good," he said. Simple words, but the wall came down. From that moment, they started talking. Not as friends, but as collaborators. They'd discuss scenes, challenge each other, push for better performances. The crew noticed, the energy on set changed, and their on-screen dynamic became electric. You can feel it in every scene they share. Two men circling each other, respect and hostility mixed into something dangerous. It wasn't acting, it was the real relationship bleeding through, and it made the film better. Number 15. The noir style wasn't planned. It happened by accident. John Seitz, the cinematographer, was trying to save money. Paramount's budget cuts meant fewer lights, smaller crews, faster setups. So Seitz embraced darkness. He used shadows to hide what they couldn't afford to build. He lit faces from below to create menace. He shot through objects, gears, banisters, anything to add visual texture without spending money. Farrow watched the dailies and loved it. The film looked different from anything Paramount was making. Darker, stranger, more expressionistic. So he leaned in harder. He asked Seitz to push it further, use longer shadows, darker backgrounds, make the building feel like a maze. Seitz obliged, and the film became a masterclass in noir cinematography. Every frame felt designed, even though half of it was just clever problem solving. The low angles that made the clock look massive saved money on set extensions. The silhouettes in the hallways hid the fact they were shooting in a real office building with limited control. The stark contrast between light and dark covered up cheap set dressing, but audiences didn't see the compromises. They saw art. Critics called it brilliant visual storytelling. Film students studied the lighting for decades, all because a cinematographer had to make do with less. Sometimes the best style comes from having no choice. Number 16. Rita Johnson filmed her final scene the day before she died. Not literally, but close. Johnson played Pauline York, Janeth's mistress, the woman whose murder sets the entire plot in motion. It's a small role, but crucial. She's only on screen for a few minutes before her character is killed. But those minutes had to count. Johnson gave everything to the performance. She made Pauline vulnerable, desperate, caught between two dangerous men. The problem was, Johnson herself was sick. She'd been struggling with health issues throughout production, severe headaches, dizzy spells, moments where she'd lose track of where she was. The studio knew. Farrow knew. But they kept shooting. On her last day, she filmed the scene where Pauline realizes she's in danger. It required her to run, to show fear, to sell genuine terror. Johnson could barely stand. Between takes, she'd sit with her head in her hands, breathing slowly, trying to stay conscious. The crew wanted to postpone, but Johnson refused. She said she could do it, and she did. One take, perfect, terrifying, real. When Farrow called cut, she smiled, thanked everyone, and walked off set. 3 years later, she suffered a severe head injury in a freak accident. She never fully recovered. Watching The Big Clock now, knowing what happened to her, that final scene hits differently. The fear in her eyes wasn't just acting. Number 17. The film was banned in 3 countries, and nobody knew why. The Big Clock premiered in the United States to solid reviews and decent box office. But when Paramount tried to distribute it internationally, they hit walls. Argentina refused to approve it for release. Spain rejected it outright. And in France, of all places, it was held up for months before finally getting a limited release. Paramount demanded explanations. Each country gave vague reasons, moral concerns, political sensitivities, inappropriate content, but none of it made sense. The film had no explicit violence, no sexual content, nothing that seemed particularly controversial. Finally, someone figured it out. The problem wasn't what the film showed, it was what it suggested. The Big Clock is about a powerful man who commits murder and uses his media empire to cover it up. In countries with authoritarian governments or tightly controlled press, That story was too close to reality. The film wasn't banned for being immoral. It was banned for being accurate. Years later, film historians discovered memos between censorship boards discussing the film's dangerous implications. One Spanish censor wrote, "This film suggests that powerful men control truth itself. We cannot allow audiences to consider such ideas." Paramount eventually gave up on some markets. The Big Clock became a casualty of its own subtext. It told a truth some governments didn't want told. Number 18. The test screening was a disaster. Paramount invited an audience to watch an early cut. No music, rough edits, placeholder sound. Just the raw footage stitched together. The response was brutal. Comment cards called it confusing, slow, boring. One person wrote, "I didn't understand what was happening, or why I should care." Another said, "The clock is more interesting than the characters." Paramount executives panicked. They considered reshooting major sections, maybe even scrapping the project entirely. Farrow argued for one thing: time. "Give me 2 weeks," he said. "Let me finish it properly. Music, sound design, final color timing, everything the audience didn't see." Paramount reluctantly agreed. 2 weeks later, they held another screening. Same film, but complete. The difference was night and day. The music heightened tension. The sound design made the clock feel alive. The pacing, with proper editing, pulled audiences through the mystery. Comment cards came back glowing. Suddenly, the confusing plot made sense. The slow sections felt atmospheric. The clock wasn't just interesting, it was terrifying. One executive who'd wanted to kill the film completely changed his stance. He called it a triumph. The Big Clock taught Paramount a hard lesson. You can't judge an unfinished film. Context, mood, rhythm, they're not decoration. They're structure. And without them, even the best story falls apart. Number 19. Ray Milland kept the clock. Not the big one that stayed at Paramount, but the small desk clock that appears in several scenes, the one George Stroud obsessively checks, comparing it to the massive timepiece looming over him. That clock was a personal prop, something Milland brought from home. He'd developed a habit during filming, constantly checking the time, feeling the pressure of schedules, deadlines, the relentless ticking of production. The clock became a physical manifestation of that anxiety. After filming wrapped, he asked if he could keep it. Paramount said yes. Milland put it in his study, and it stayed there for the rest of his life. Visitors would ask about it, and he'd tell them it was from the Big Clock. Then he'd add, "That film nearly broke me. I've never felt more trapped by a role." The clock served as a reminder, not of success or fame, but of what it took to create something that mattered. Years later, in interviews, Milland would say, the Big Clock was his favorite performance, not The Lost Weekend, which won him an Oscar, not any of his romantic leads or war films. The Big Clock, because it was the only role where he genuinely didn't know if he'd make it to the end. And that fear, that pressure, that constant awareness of time running out, it made him a better actor. Number 20. The film almost had a different ending. In Kenneth Fearing's novel, the resolution is ambiguous, morally complex, deeply unsettling. George Stroud escapes, but barely. The powerful men who tried to destroy him remain in power. Justice isn't served, just postponed. Farrow wanted to keep that ending. He shot it. It's somewhere in Paramount's vault, a darker, more cynical conclusion that left audiences uncomfortable. But the studio demanded changes. They said American audiences needed closure, needed to see the bad guy punished, needed hope. Farrow fought them for weeks. He argued the ambiguous ending was the point. This isn't a fairy tale. It's a warning. Power protects itself. The system survives. But Paramount wouldn't budge. So Farrow compromised. He reshot the ending, giving it a more definitive resolution. Janeth faces consequences. Stroud walks free. Justice, however imperfect, wins. It wasn't what Farrow wanted, but it's what got released. And here's the strange part. Audiences loved it. Critics praised the satisfying conclusion. The film became a success, but Farrow always regretted it. He felt he'd betrayed the novel, softened the message, traded truth for comfort. Decades later, film scholars still debate which ending is better, but the original version, the one Farrow fought for, remains locked away. lost to studio politics and the fear that audiences couldn't handle the truth. Bonus fact: after the film wrapped, the giant clock became a problem. It was too big to store, too expensive to move, too unique to destroy. Paramount tried selling it, no buyers. They offered it to museums, no takers. For months, it sat on the soundstage, this massive, beautiful piece of machinery with nowhere to go. Studio executives walked past it every day, a 20-foot reminder of a film that cost more than expected and earned less than hoped. Finally, someone had an idea. They dismantled it, piece by piece, and distributed the parts across different productions. The gears showed up in a sci-fi serial. The pendulum appeared in a horror film. The illuminated face got repainted and used in a musical. The clock that defined the big clock was scattered, repurposed, erased from existence as a singular object. Years later, Ray Milland visited Paramount and asked to see it. They told him it was gone. He stood on the empty soundstage where it once loomed and said, "That's perfect." It's exactly what the film was about. Time doesn't stop. It just gets recycled. And in a strange way, he was right. The clock lived on, hiding in plain sight across dozens of films, still ticking, still counting down, still reminding everyone that time always wins. The Big Clock wasn't just a thriller about murder and media. It was a race against time itself, on screen and off. And somehow, against every obstacle, bad blood, budget cuts, studio interference, and a prop that nearly killed someone, they finished it. Not perfectly, but powerfully. And 75 years later, that clock is still ticking in the minds of everyone who watches.